Hello, welcome to our lecture. I want to spend some time today um, just talking about the sort of history of Moors and Black occupation and control of the Iberian Peninsula, parts of Spain and Portugal. And I want to do this for a couple of reasons. I think it's important to really dive into the history of Moorish Europe as we're talking about what's happening in early modern Europe, even though um, the Moors' control of Europe happens about before the early modern period. We might think of the early modern period as a time where the removal of the Moorish influence is also taking shape. So we're gonna spend some time really looking at how what that means, um, how you can think of the Moors both certainly as black and also also certainly Islamic as well. We can also think of the ways that this vast Islamic network that is now proliferating around North Africa, the Middle East, and other parts of even the Far East is really creating a cosmopolitan, urban, diverse, multicultural world where in the Islamic world there doesn't seem to be the same tension between science and knowledge and religious power that exists at the same time within the Catholic Church. So all of these issues that we've been talking about in the class, we're going to see sort of discussed today. And I found this online. I'm just going to use this. There are not 48 slides. It actually starts over. But you can go back and look at any of this, obviously, at your leisure. First and foremost, when we are talking about the people of the Iberian Peninsula, what we are talking about are these regions that are modern day Spain and Portugal. But this area of Western Europe, as you can see, touches, right, North Africa. So there's a long history of interaction here, and even dating back to the Roman times. We will find a variety of different types of religions in the region. The Visigoths rule Spain from around 400 to 711 AD. 711 being the rise of the Muslim presence in the Iberian Peninsula, and the sort of Muslim occupation, if you will. In the 7th century, Arabs are conquering the Berbers, and they are also spreading religious ideas with them. North Africa being one of those places that very much starts to become reshaped by Islam, both in terms of culture, but also in terms of society and religion. And the Moors are going to sort of emerge out of this mixed Arab, Berber, Islamic population. And then the Moors are going to invade the Visigoths. The term itself is an English term, Moor. The origin of the English term Moor is Greek, which means black. So the ethnic mix of Berbers and Arabs is referring to the black skin. So it is a term that is definitionally understood in terms of race. All right. So what does that mean? So black Muslims rule Spain for over 700 years. So let's just pause on that tidbit. It is something to write down. It is something to remember. You can also think of it as during the medieval time period in Western Europe, as Muslims occupied the Iberian Peninsula. It's not considered medieval Europe, right? It's considered an age of philosophy, religion, science. So as the rest of Western Europe is living under these quote unquote medieval times, these dark ages, where there's no science, where there's a lot of sort of religious fear of, of God sort of striking you down, the Moors are not that. Those sort of negative characteristics of medieval Europe are not given to this Moorish occupation of the Iberian Peninsula, and that's really interesting. The Iberian Peninsula is the Caliphate of Cordoba, and we will start to see some of the ways that the rich history of this 700-year time period is still evident in terms of architecture, as well as its impacts today. So one of the interesting things about the Moors is that although Islamic, they certainly understood and allowed for what they called the people of the book. And this is the practice dating back to what Muhammad discusses as part of his revelations, that the goal of the Muslim is not to force conversion, right? They welcome it, they encourage it, but for quote unquote the people of the book, that includes Christians and Jews, they are allowed to live in Islamic areas as long as they pay a tax, and they also sort of have to wear something to demonstrate that they are not Muslim. And today, when you look around especially southern Spain, the sort of physical remnants of this time is still very evident, from, again, the architecture to different types of sort of urban plans and designs. All right. There is also sort of an introduction of food from other parts of the Islamic world, which is really interesting, right? As these will become sort of part of what we consider Spanish culture and cuisine today, but really reflect a broader influence from the Middle East, including rice, saffron, coriander. I think it's really interesting to learn about history and culture by food, because it is such, or through food rather, because it's such a visceral way of experiencing it. So the Moors will have a impact because of these links to other parts of the empire, the Islamic empires, sort of bringing other foods of this Mediterranean world into the diets of the people of the Iberian Peninsula. Another interesting aspect of this is the use of the lute, right? So the lute and other stringed instruments become very much tied to the medieval world, as well as later to early modern Europe. The idea of, say, these traveling vagabonds, troubadours, right? Traveling musicians. These are the types of instruments they would play. And of course, they're also brought to us through the Islamic world. So the Islamic world is going to continue to give, culturally speaking, to a place even after the Christian world tries to write them out of history. They will say, we will keep your instruments and your music, but pretend you weren't here. Interesting how we can find modern parallels to that. As I mentioned before, one of the most striking aspects of the difference between the Western Christian world and the Western Islamic world is the reaction to science, right? The Catholic Church, as we've discussed before, is waging a war on science, both during the Dark Ages as well as during the early modern period. And as I mentioned previously, we don't seem to find the same tension between scientific understanding and Islamic practices that we see in the Christian world. And perhaps this is something to really extrapolate and to dive into more. But nonetheless, right, the scientific progress that we will ascribe to the Renaissance, in terms of the belief that humans can know and obtain knowledge. The fact that we can sort of understand distinctive ways of processing and organizing the world, whether that be astronomy, physics, math, right? Um, the idea of intellect and philosophy is really thriving here in Moorish Spain and Portugal. Um, so again, we won't see that same level of intellectual development until in other parts of Western Europe, like I said, until the Renaissance of the 1500s. So Islam is really bringing this, right? Islam is the force that is one of the threads of scientific knowledge that is really tearing at the Christian world. In Europe, and during this time, there are only two universities, and the Moors have 17 great universities, right, located across their vast empire. So a different understanding of knowledge and the application of that knowledge. In the 10th and 11th centuries, public libraries in Europe were non-existent, while Moorish Spain boasted more than 70, right? The city of Cordova, the capital, housing over 6,000 manuscripts. Let me ask you this quick question. Has the printing press been developed yet? Answer, no, it has not. So although the printing press and its development by Guggenheim in the 14, what is it? Guggenheim, is that his name? Gutenberg, sorry, I knew that was wrong. In the whatever it is, 1455 or whatever, that's going to ignite a chain, a technological innovation that really allows for education and the democratization of knowledge, right? In unprecedented ways in Western Europe. But that's during the early modern period. Here again, you have the example of the Islamic world doing this hundreds of years before. So, although there is no printing press, their sort of prolific writing and the prolific writing that is done by across the Islamic world is really generating a abundance of literature, of public records, of documents, of written text, and you also see really the development of this numeral system as well. All right, different parts of the Iberian Peninsula. I'd sort of again demonstrate the architecturally the commitment to this. Anytime you see these archways that have sort of the spike at the top, they're rounded with the spike. That is, those are an immediate characteristic of Islamic architecture, as well as sort of the building of of the points on top. So you have that same thing again with the pointed archway, right? The use of mosaic tiles and patterns as a mechanism to sort of demonstrate power and beauty, of course. Also, you really have the adoption of a number of Arabic words that will be incorporated into modern day Spanish, another way that we can sort of measure the impact of Islam on the region. The Battle of Tours is, of course, the famous battle in around 732 between other parts of the Holy Roman, or what will become part of the Holy Roman Empire and Islam, right? And in this one, there's about 80,000 Muslims fighting about 30,000 Franks, or again, in regions that will become France. So we often think of the sort of deadly conflict between the Christian world and Muslims as starting after this time period with the call from Pope Urban. What is it, Pope Urban II, for the First Crusade? This is really happening on the ground hundreds of years before that. In terms of technology, it was a little different from their French counterparts, right? The Muslim forces were mainly of cavalry gear for offensive warfare. They relied on a sword and a lance. Arrows used very little. A difference done by the Franks, who used very sort of Greek ideas of warfare at the time. But we would see certainly a difference in technology, weaponry, and even sort of approaches to the military. Um, Again, this conflict between um, Islam and the Christian world is happening both in Western Europe, and it's also going to continue um, to sort of spill over into Eastern Europe as well as in the Middle East. So, what we are leading to, right, is a time where the Christian world and Christian Spain is going to try to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula as a Christian kingdom or for Christians. And this campaign to drive out the Moors, to drive out Islam, and to expel Jews if they must, excuse me, allergies, is known as the Reconquista. So, just as we might expect, this time period of Muslim occupation is going to end, and it's going to end very forcefully by Christians who see this as an effort not only to purge the Middle East of Muslims, but also to do it in Western Europe as well. I can't think I have to sneeze. I'm sorry. So, Spanish are going to basically take back different regions or different areas of Spain and Portugal, sort of one piece at a time. Portugal separates in the 12th century to form its own kingdoms and country. So you have different campaigns, right, in the various regions: Aragon, Castile, Leon, Portugal, Galicia, um, and then this area down here that remains sort of a Muslim stronghold. Excuse me. So you have five sort of kingdoms that are across the Iberian Peninsula: Kingdom of Portugal, Aragon, Castile, Navarre, Granada. Each kingdom has its own language, which is certainly going to complicate things. We would find very similar linguistic differences across places like France and Germany at this time, as there's not a unified language. Those type of designations don't happen until basically the modern period. So that's really interesting to think about, just sort of the difficulty of communication when there are so many languages that are being spoken across the Iberian Peninsula. And of course, there are regions today of Spain that are attempting to be independent. And one of the arguments for this is linguistic difference. So interesting how that continues. Part of the era of the Reconquista is happening right at the beginning of the early modern period. And again, an example of the power of marriage that will also be a common theme throughout our class is really unifying alliances, both political, cultural, diplomatic, economic, etc., brokering those alliances through marriage. And here you see the example of that with King Ferdinand of Aragon, right? Queen Isabel of Castile. Once they combined their two kingdoms, let's go back: Aragon, Castile. Well, those are the two largest regions in Spain. So once those two marry, right, boom, you've got a stronghold. You've got a huge power bloc against Granada, against other parts of the South, against France, if it's so, and the Franks, if they choose to invade again, right? So think about these particular early modern European marriages as diplomacy and alliance making in action. What do they want? Let's go back. They want a trade route here, right? They want a trade route to China because of this extensive network of Islam. You can get goods from the Chinese border all the way into Europe. What this king and queen want is to get there, right, without having to go through the Islamic world. So part, again, of this age of exploration, that is one of the other sort of broad categories of the early modern European period, is you want to get here without going overland. All these Silk Roads, right, connect. You don't have to get on a boat. You can go from Venice all the way to China without ever getting in a boat. Why get in a boat? So you can get there without going through the Muslim world. So that's really the impetus for Western European, quote unquote, age of exploration, right? Or age of discovery. Not so much discovery as avoidance. Why don't we call it the age of Muslim avoidance, right? So that's really what's going on there. And that's, again, going to bring in this guy, great killer Columbus, who is going to find or attempt to find a route to China, which he doesn't, of course, and we all know that story. So once those two regions, right, become interlocked through marriage, they are going to be officially unified, and giving it a new name as well. This is going to be called Spain. And then having this Christian king say, well, for those Muslims who are here, you got to leave. So there is sort of a death cult, if you will. You can convert or you can die. If you try to stay, you are going to be forced to convert your religion or disavow your Islamic practices, which also then means, right, your writing, your science, etc., etc. All right. This unification of Spain takes on state-sponsored violence and oppression in many ways. Not only are forced conversions, right? So remember, in Islam, you may not convert by force; doesn't exist. Christianity, you very much the practice of forced conversion is used. And they also go after Arabic texts, right? Remember all those thousands and thousands of books and written works that I was talking about. Many of those are burned. Much of it is destroyed. You can think of it as a brutal assault on the public memory of Moorish occupation of the region. Moors are converting, or they're leaving Spain, or they're being killed in pursuit of one of the other. So that is just a brief history of this violent encounter. What we are seeing again is an ongoing clash, just very quickly, indulge me, between Christianity and Islam. So typically when we think about the Crusades, right, remember they go on from around 1095 to 1492. So of that time of Moorish occupation of Spain, right, most of that, there is a ongoing war going on in the Middle East. So remember that. Remember there is this ongoing tension spilling out all over the world between Christianity and and Islam. And instead of that getting better or easier or less violent over time, we sort of see two simultaneous things happen. With the Protestant Reformation, not only will Christians continue to be at war with the Islamic world, they will be at war with one another. Conversely, on the Islamic side, although there is this expansive Islamic empire that is the largest of its kind, it is also being threatened by the Sunni Shia split. It is threatened by the development of sort of new religious identities taking shape, such as Sikhism. There is sort of a culture of Arabness, so to speak, that some aspects of the Ottoman Empire are going to reject as well. And then, of course, there is issues of sort of identity threatening the Ottoman Empire. So what I'm trying to say here, very inarticulately, is that you could make the case that both these religions are at war with each other, Christianity and Islam, but they're also at war with themselves. And those things are going on absolutely at the same time. So we will continue to sort of look at the ways in which we can see the demonstration, the impact of Moorish occupation on Western Europe. You might also think of the ways that then Spanish and this new Spain, right, Portugal, will sort of go out of its way to remove its Black past. So continue to think about that, especially in relation to what we are learning about the Black history of early modern Europe. Try to square those two things as we understand the sort of depth and complexity of the Black population in Europe, and yet there will be a movement in Spain to forget this Moorish past, right? And the same thing perhaps going on with other powerful Black leaders that we had seen in terms of the aristocracy in places like Florence and in other parts of Western Europe. So let me know if you have any questions, and I will speak to you very soon.